everybody. Welcome to another episode of Career Club's LinkedIn Live. My name is Bob Goodwin, and I'm the founder of Career Club. If you're not familiar with us, we are helping folks find careers that mean more to them by using proven sales and marketing methods that help folks find careers that matter to them. This is a live event, so you are welcome to ask questions, put in comments. We have a pretty good attendance today, so we may not get to every question or comment, and if we don't, apologies now. If you're not already connected with us on LinkedIn, with Career Club and with me, please do. Would love to be connected with you so that you see future events. Plus, we post content pretty regularly and would like to make sure that you see that. Want to also say thank you, as always, to my colleague Heather, who is the magic behind making these events happen. So Heather, thank you. And especially today, because we had just a little bit of a technology snafu getting our guest piped in from London, England. So with that, maybe that's a good opportunity to introduce our guest today, Bahige El-Rayes. Bahige is a partner with Bain and Company, the consulting group, and helps look after their consumer products group. And Bahige, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Really nice to be here. Different setting this time with a virtual one. Hopefully we can meet in person soon. And Heather, thank you so much for your help. I know that you do a lot of magic in the back scene. Really, really glad to be here.
Yeah, no, she definitely does. You have no idea how much magic she does. It makes me look good. So thank you for that. So Bahige, we met a few years ago. This is one of those random met on an airplane kinds of a thing. And it turns out we had a lot in common around consumer packaged goods and retail and kind of all the things that surround that. But before we dive into our actual topic, one of our little traditions here is just a little bit of an icebreaker, just a few minutes, just to help folks get to know you a little bit. So an easy one. Where were you born and raised, Bahige?
So I wish it was that easy, being Lebanese by origin. And like many of my fellow Lebanese, we basically grew up in different parts of the world. So I was born in Geneva, Switzerland. Went to school there for a few years and went back to my home country, Lebanon, did my education. And then worked in the Middle East for 5 years before moving to the States, where I've worked for 9 years between Chicago and New York. And then I've been in London for 3 years.
Very good. Well, just in time for the pandemic, right? So,
exactly.
Well, for those of us in the States, we miss you. We're happy that you're in London and thriving. I personally miss you. So just a little bit about your family. I know that you guys have a not too distant addition to the family.
That's right. I'm lucky to be surrounded by girls. And just for context, we're coming from a family of I have two brothers, so we're basically, our parents always said that, they wish they had more girls, and I think this generation, I'm surrounded by girls, which makes me very lucky. For Father's Day, obviously, the last few days were a joy. So I have to say, the motto of my life these days is finding a balance, right? So what's the right balance across everything that's happening at home and at work and with my clients and elsewhere. So I think that becomes quite important, which I know you watching many of your prior podcasts you touched upon.
No, thank you. And that's exactly right. If there's been a silver lining to the pandemic, it has been a little bit of a reset on priorities. And you've probably heard me say this before. Before the pandemic, the frame was work and our lives had to fit into that frame. And now the frame is our lives and work needs to fit into it. And I think that we could probably all agree that that's been a healthy kind of recalibration of priorities. You've had a very interesting career arc. We met when you were at a prior company before joining Bain, but do you mind sharing with folks just kind of briefly your career arc?
Absolutely. So I always had a drive in me to always work in parallel to my academics. So in my undergraduate degree, which was in business and finance, I had 5 different jobs already, so I realized that probably that was one of the things to wanting to discover the workforce. And that was a really formative experience because I realized, the different skill sets and got a view of the industry. So for all of the if anyone is earlier in their career, I think it's really good to basically develop a broad spectrum of what's out there to figure out what you don't like. So that's how I started, which is not answering what I like, but answering what I don't like. And I started in finance. I started in banking. Becoming initially as a teller in a bank, then treasury, then private banking, a bit of investment banking. So did a series of different jobs. Even at one point in time, I was basically calling up people and asking about their retirement and whether they wanted sales, different planning, their retirement. So did that at an earlier age, and it taught me a lot. And I still carry a lot of those skill sets with me because, you had to think about, sales skills and really being able to talk to different types of people, etc. That I think stays on with you. But then I quickly realized that while I enjoy a lot of the different jobs I had, I enjoyed the variety. And at the time, my professor told me, okay, you're speaking like a consultant and you may want to, go into consulting. And being in Lebanon, it was at the time a smaller market. You're not exposed to, all types of consulting firms. So, didn't necessarily jump in and find opportunities straight away. I started working in a small boutique in Lebanon. That was very formative as well. It was, by one of the, senior partner in a big consulting company, and worked with him and did a series of projects domestically. Then moved to Dubai, which was the next big market, and then quickly realized that I needed to actually have international experience, and also there's more to it than just work. So at the time, after 5 years in the Middle East, I pressed Control-Alt-Delete on my life in a way, and moved to Chicago. And I remember when I moved to Chicago, it was in February 2011. And the partner that talked to me then told me, that there's a big temperature difference between Chicago and Dubai, right? Being Dubai, which was the peak of the season, the night season. And I remember getting to Chicago, it was Lakeshore was frozen, right?
Oh my gosh.
So that's what I moved there. But it was a very formative because I went out of my comfort zone and really met a ton of people. Chicago being a hub for the Midwest initially, basically got exposed to a lot of, work, and especially as you do, my work has been in consumer packaged good, with a lot of my time spent with food companies. So spent quite a bit of time there. And then had the chance to move around the U.S. So New York for 7 years, but I was always on the plane, and that's how I effectively we met, which is a very great experience, but it was very random, right? And then we realized we have a ton of things in common, as you say. And then, I realized that, with time, and my wife was expecting, we wanted to be closer to home. So London was basically a good, place to settle in and be between, Lebanon and the US. And I had the chance to basically move to Bain, and within Bain, continue focused on consumer packaged good, but really with the intersection of supply chain. Yep. Which is nowadays a very topical subject that a lot of people talk about, which is important. It's going through massive transformation, and I feel within my role we can contribute a bit to this journey.
Well, no, that's fascinating. Just a couple quick side notes. You mentioned being younger, and it was more of a test for negatives and finding out what you don't like. If you're a young person listening to this, or the parent of a young person, most people don't know what they want to do, but they start to figure out what they don't like. And it's just like, playing sports or playing a musical instrument. You have to try different things to figure out what resonates with you, or maybe what you don't like. So I think that's a really important lesson. The second thing was a little bit of the variety that you've had. And, sometimes people in their careers, are apologetic or regretful that they've had sort of this quilt work of experiences. But I really do believe that ultimately contributes to a unique value proposition. You're drawing things from when you worked at the bank, from other consulting companies, other experiences that you've had living in different places. And all of that creates a unique value proposition that makes Bahige who you are and things that other people can't replicate. So I think that as you kind of went through that, there's some lessons to be drawn, and clearly it's worked out well for you. Picking up though on the last point that you're making around supply chain, which is our theme for today, supply chain is very front and center in the news these days for a myriad of reasons, and I know that you'll break that down a little bit. But one of the things that I know that you believe is true, if you could begin to touch on it, is how supply chain is and should be more than just, logistics and procurement, that it's a much more strategic thing for a company to be thinking about than maybe things that might feel a little bit more tactical. Just kind of to start to create a little bit of a ceiling or a roof for us to contain our conversation. Why is supply chain strategic and not just tactical?
No, that's a good question. And, I'm smiling because the title was Now What, So What?
What, so what, now what?
Here we go. And then, I had a bunch of basically my friends say, okay, is that sounds very frameworky, consulting style, but I really love it because, it brings the essence of it.
Yep.
Essentially, we went from an era where basically supply chain was considered an enabler, moving boxes, all about efficiency, scale, just in time, globalization, etc. Where we started seeing, probably 5-7 years ago, first sight of transformation with the digitization and acceleration and what's happening. And really, the pandemic changed everything because all of a sudden we had stockouts of the various goods, and people realized that supply chain is a critical capability needed to run organization. To the extent that governments around the world are basically more than ever realizing this is a critical capabilities for their survival and for GDP growth. And when you look at the investments being done by governments, whether it's in the European Union or whether it's North America or elsewhere, it's always been a critical capability, right? Supply chain being the need to do that. And now what we're seeing is a balancing act from decades of industrialization, globalization, searching for efficiencies, really bringing down the cost so that people can have a piece of meat on their table for dinner every night, for an affordable cost, to basically realizing that there's basically a cost of doing things, and there's probably a need for adjusting that. And now this is becoming as I said, a matter of national security, from governments. It is becoming a matter of survival. That's a big theme that we're seeing, that for many consumer companies in specific, basically having a well-functioning supply chain allows them to make sure they continue meet the business goals that they have. And then for some, not for many, it's a way to differentiate, right? So basically, we're seeing for some, a well-functioning supply chain is no longer an enabler. It's a core strategic function to differentiate, to meet their goals. So whether it is supporting direct-to-commerce or direct-to-consumer initiative, or whether it is platformizing supply chain, or whether it is creating excellence in planning, those are a lot of themes that we can tackle. Those are sources of differentiation that not many companies have. So that's kind of the evolutions that I see.
Yeah. So looking at our framework, so thank you, because I do love that framework. Coming from market research, we had a client one time that says, Bob, you guys are really good at the what, but I'm not sure so what about any of this. And if any of it is important, what should I do about it? So I really appreciate you playing with me with that framework, because I do find it quite helpful. So, if the what, is obviously, as you say, the pandemic, but we've got, other pressures that are acting, on the world, whether it's what's going on in Ukraine and wheat, as an example, or here in the U.S. and in Europe as well, for different reasons, but related maybe, energy is all of a sudden, in short supply and high demand. That has all kinds of ripple effects. As you're talking with your clients, and again, if we can just make sure that we've got a good foundation here on just the what part of it, from a supply chain perspective, what are sort of the key things that you're talking to clients about that are most impactful, that they should be most focused on when it comes to supply chain?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So first of all, we're going through a hyperinflation market caused by a lot of the shocks that you talk about. The level of inflation we're seeing now reminds us of emerging markets and what we used to see in Latin America in the last 10, 20 years. And we're seeing this in the US and in Europe and in the UK, right, and in different countries. And this is alarming because the supply chains and the economies and the companies, the way they're run, we're geared for low inflation. That's what we're used to live in a certain way. So I think the first thing is, how do I survive? That's the first question I keep on getting, which is, how do I survive? How do I make sure that, because I cannot, just keep on raising prices, right? And there's a vicious cycle in raising prices where, I raise prices and sometimes it's too high and I lose market share with the hope of, initially I raise the prices to alleviate the margin pressure I have. I end up losing market share and it creates more supply chain issues and I have a bigger problem. I have to raise prices again. So there's not an easy solve, right? So the first thing that we're getting nowadays is, how do I fight inflation, and what's that spectrum of levers that I could take, from basically pricing all the way to design to value to procurement, supply chain, etc. We have a spectrum of things that you could apply, and what's the right one, and by market, by channel, by product, right? There's a different answer, different unlock accordingly. The second topic that I keep on getting is the whole topic of resiliency. And nowadays as well, with labor shortages, with packaging shortages, with energy prices, there's pockets of places where we basically are not able to get the product on time or not able to get the product altogether. Just look at what's happening with containers, global ocean trade, massive inflation, right? So the rates have been increasing by 2x in the last year or so, and supply chain have globalized, right? In the last years, all what they've done is they've looked to globalize, and with that type of increase, getting the right product at the right time, the right vessel, and moving it halfway all the way to the world becomes problematic. So that topic of resiliency is not easy to tackle because it's cross-functional by nature. It's not something where I can say it's the way you move boxes, or it's the way you manufacture, or it's the way you plan, or it's the way, it starts with, what's my portfolio? Am I leading with the right portfolio, or do I have a lot of complexity that is not needed in the portfolio? Then goes back to each of the functions from, planning, manufacturing, sourcing, and delivery, and all the way back to also customer service, because there's a feedback loop of what's needed and how do you build that back in the supply chain. So that's another big topic that we do. And then the third one, which are titles that we can, if you'd like, dive deeper, is, okay, in light of both of these, etc., what's the balancing act? I have commitments made to the streets on sustainability. I have to fight inflation. I have to basically, digitize my supply chain. I have to drive resiliency. The priorities you can imagine, if you're a chief supply chain officer or a chief executive, you have so many priorities and you're not able to work on all of those. So what are the 3 or 5 that are most critical? And, how do I focus on them? And then how do I trickle it down and make those decisions? So what's that decision agenda? I think that's something to think about.
So it's almost a yes/no question. We can dive into it in a minute because I want to ask you something else really quick. But with those balancing acts, Does that vary by company, or is that a standard answer for companies?
Of course, it varies by companies, and even within by company, it almost often varies by segment, etc. So you have to do the work and then really bring it back up and say, okay, given all of these, this is almost my treasure map of opportunities, and therefore these are the ones I'm going to focus practically on.
Yeah, well, we even saw this morning, you probably saw that Kellogg is splitting into three, right? Which is a tacit, admission that these are three different businesses that would have three different priorities. I want to touch back on resiliency, though. Something that we haven't talked about before, but is another thing that is now in constrained supply is money, right? So if it's venture capital, that has turned, no pun intended, on a dime, right? That it was free and easy until it wasn't very recently. And all of a sudden it's like these companies that were pitching a growth story now have to pitch a profitability story. And if I've raised a Series B or Series C, that next round is going to be way harder to come by than the previous rounds. Or if I am a big multinational, one of the public companies that we all know, my cost of capital is going up very significantly. Like on a percentage basis, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, like from a year ago, even 2 quarters ago, what my cost of capital is. How are you seeing actually money supply impacting companies' priorities and ability to be resilient?
Yeah, I would say it's money supply, and it is also resource supply, resource in general, capital being one of them, labor being another as well, which is talent, because we're seeing constraints in both, right? Constraints in money becoming more expensive. And frankly, if you ask anyone, trying to hire how hard it is, when you add those two up, right, that changes the dynamic completely. And that's the point I'm trying to make, which is now it's all about, prioritizing, what are the must-win battles that I need to do, right? I cannot do everything. Capital is no longer what it used to be. It's not much more constrained. In many ways, which is a bit contrarian what I'm about to say, in many ways, this is creating a healthy, I know there's a lot of, pressures, etc., but there's a healthy adjustment that is taking place of, okay, things that were going on for many years because, they're just got money and were able to raise much easily. Now, all of a sudden, they need to think about the fundamentals of the business,
right,
which probably was not taking place as much before. I think that's not such a bad thing. I think that, there is multiple ways to make a business case on whether you're a small company, there's multiple ways to actually, think through that, right? And that value creation story become quite important.
Yeah, and on the talent side, which of course at Career Club we think a lot about, we do think, and I think we see that supply of talent is actually going to be opening up a little bit as people start doing layoffs. Because if you're the CFO, CEO of these companies, and you've got to make your number somehow, some way, people are not an insignificant cost in that. But it also, to me, reminds me of your earlier point about trying to take too much on price actually creates a bunch of negative consequences, right, that kind of exacerbate over time.
Yeah.
So you start losing share. And in the same way, when you start losing talent, you lose your creativity and your ability just to get work done.
That's a bigger point you're making, which is what I see sometimes is that there is a series, at Bain, we keep on talking about future back and present forward, right? So there's a lot.
Say that again slowly. What is it?
There's a big terminology we call future back. So really starting with where the market is going to be, where my consumer will be in the future, et cetera, and reimagining the future. And then there is another thing where we think present forward, which is, okay, where am I right now and what do I need to do? And I see a lot of companies really thinking about present forward. So, how I'm going to be able to survive and what do I need to do, how I'm going to make my numbers, right? Whether it's FTEs or not, or whether it is this or that. I see the need to sometimes also take a step back and make sure that the series of measures you're doing now is going to allow you to thrive 5 years from now? And I ask that question to every client I meet, which is, okay, is all of the set of actions you're doing right now going to allow you to be more successful 5-10 years down the line? And it's not an easy solution, right? And you almost have to do both simultaneously. Simultaneously think of the future and how your consumer, if you look at the consumer in the future, and with the fragmentation of trade, and with all the new channels that are rising, and that demand that keeps on changing. When you look at your sustainability commitments and what you need to do in the future, when you look at how the market is going to change, you then start thinking, okay, as I manage my supply chain today, am I moving in that direction, or am I taking measures just to survive and go after this crisis? And I'm going to have another almost self-made crisis 3 years from now, because the action that I took today were just being reactive to what I'm going through. And that's a really important discussion that not a lot of companies are going through.
Well, it sort of harkens back to your third pillar, which is this balancing act, because I need to, if I'm a public company, satisfy the street and my shareholders sufficiently so I'm around next year to worry about the future problems.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to your point, are the short-term actions that we need to take right now consistent with, or in alignment with where the business needs to be in 3-5 years? Or are we going to have to basically have a form of tech debt that needs to get paid down on another day?
That's right. I think that in every transformation that you're doing, you need to basically, there's no regrets move that you need to do, for sure, right? And I think that there's absolutely no time to wait. With the inflation rates we're seeing there, that's not a luxury that you have to actually go think of the future only. So there are things you need to do. There's a standard toolkit on inflation. If you're not following it, then you're probably missing out, right? And that one of the things we do is typically, the first thing we do is, okay, what's the balance of levers that you should apply between commercial, meaning pricing and changing your trade, etc., and between supply chain and operational levers, right? And you have that answer. Is it well articulated, or are you being transactional about it? So I think there's a playbook on inflation that is really important that you apply right now, and really understand all the levers that you have and which one is going to be significant, which one you can apply.
Yeah,
but then there's a need to simultaneously, change the business as well, which is, how can I get ahead of the curve? And that's the really hard thing. It's not easy. How can I get ahead? How can I stop being reactive? Because a lot of the things is just being reacting to what you're going through. How can I get ahead? And digitization is a key enabler for that, data and analytics as well. And I'm sure now, the hot topic these days is control tower, right? There's a lot of that buzzword being used. And what it means, control tower, is you basically establish real-time visibility of a particular category where you get to see real-time what's happening. So you're able to actually steer the supply chain one way or another. And it can apply to different types of capabilities. It's important that as you basically roll out those type of capabilities that allows you to future-proof your organization, to also think about value delivery, to also think, okay, how am I going to be able to make better decisions? And for this not to become, just a capability discussion that does not have a hook. And that's why we see a lot of benefits coming in.
Well, so let's talk about this a little bit. So one of the things that we had in a prior conversation was around, yes, you can take price, but the brand needs to perform to the price, right? So there's a value part of that. I'm going to ask this. It's going to sound like a statement. I mean it as a question. As you look at somebody like Procter, who historically and even now tends to be more premium priced, but they justify the pricing through superior performance of their brands, so that not only are they able to kind of keep their more than head above water from a pricing perspective, but because they're building into the mind of the consumer, and in reality, we hope, superior performing products, that they're not caught in this whipsaw of being reactive back and forth, that short-term action is consistent with the long-term value of the brand. That was a statement meant to be a question. Could you kind of opine on that, Bahige?
Yeah, I think that I'm not gonna comment on particular companies, but basically, what we're seeing in general across the industry is that there's the topic of insurgent brands coming in and basically changing the dynamics. So insurgent brands are typically smaller companies that have been created, not too long ago, that operate still, like a startup almost. And usually what they're able to do is be very, very close to the consumer and much more reactive to what the consumer has been. And our research shows is that those insurgent brands have been taking share from the big corporates much, much more, faster than anything else. So what is changing is that, you have those top 20 CPGs around the globe, facing also a balancing act of themselves, right? Which is, first of all, I'm getting competition from, an atypical set of competition I have.
Mm-hmm.
My toolkit that I've used in the past, which is, thinking of pricing and price increases, is no longer working as it is before. And I'm faced with all of those challenges that I have. And my balancing act is, how do I navigate the present and transform for the future? That's not an easy task, and that's, I think, what CEOs are trying to think about, which is how do you do both? And usually, and at the time of a crisis where no one has a lot of patience to actually do conceptual stuff, right? Like or think of the future, and used to be 5-10 year strategies, etc. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about how do you make sure that whatever steps you're doing now is not gonna go against your sustainability commitments, as an example.
Yes. So I was reading some Bain thought leadership coming into this call in around supply chain, and some of the things that you guys talk about is you can actually use supply chain as a competitive advantage. If I'm in stock and a consumer's preferred brand is not in stock, that generates trial almost by definition that would not have happened before. There was customer satisfaction, your retailer's happier with you, right? Because you are able to continue to keep product on shelf, which, depending on where you fit in the brand hierarchy, could allow you to leapfrog and become a category manager where you haven't been historically, because you're showing category leadership. Obviously, being able to honor your financial commitments better. And there's a host of other benefits. As we help clients think about strategically using supply chain and moving it away from, I like how you say this, moving boxes to there, those are some pretty powerful levers that have real significant financial impact. The supply chain doesn't all have to be this big negative or just trying to squeeze the last penny out of a vendor. Could you make it a little bit?
Yeah, we usually make it very practical. Okay, so how do you take something and make it very practical? And the first thing we do is we basically think about a segmentation within any company. Just start by understand where my future portfolio is going to be, which are my growth, like where my growth is going to come from, which ones are basically what categories, channels, portfolio dynamic is going to be big important pieces, but are not necessarily going to grow. I just need to keep survive with it. What are options, basically small things I'm doing that may not move the needle, but they're really important because I'm testing on each one of those. So starting with that, then we translate it into supply chain terminology, and we say, okay, I probably need to run 3 different types of supply chain. I need my simple and efficient supply chain, where basically I'm gonna go in and make sure that it's as lean as possible, that I'm managing to cost and really drive it, and there are certain decisions you do to actually do that. Then you have another one, which is, okay, this is my growth priority. I want to be in stock all the time. Service level is number one. I am gonna make sure that I'm fully resilient. I want to make sure that if one plant goes off grid, I have another one. I want to bring my co-packers and third-party manufacturers and basically become much more strategic with them. So there we deploy the full resiliency playbook, end to end, right? To make sure that I'm supporting that growth environment and make sure that I invest in the right way. And there's a series of decisions that I need to make to actually support that. And then there is basically a third one, which is, listen, this is not going to move the needle, but these are a series of bets I am doing because I'm confident one of them in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years is going to become big. And I need to constantly test and trial and change and whatever. And I cannot run it in those two other supply chains. I need to run it in a differentiated supply chain. And there you basically take you design the supply chain for complexity. So you realize that you're going to have a ton of changeovers, that you're going to have a completely different set of parameters to work with. And those are three very different and run very differently with different infrastructure, ways of working, etc. And there may be others as well, right? You can have one for sustainability, which is different. So that's a little bit what I also mean with balancing act, which is you really understanding your priorities, your segmentation, and designing the right answers for each.
Super helpful. The quality thinking is amazing to me. If we think of it from the retailer's perspective, I feel like we've been a little manufacturing focused. Yeah. If you sort of flip the lens and looked at it from a retailer or channel perspective, how would you advise people to be thinking about this?
So if I'm thinking from a retailer perspective, I would say you're even closer to the consumer. And I would start, before talking about supply chain, that's probably not the right place to start with, which is, how you're going to create more loyalty with your consumer and keep on increasing your share of wallet and market share. And, partly is thinking of the whole discussion around platforms, if you're familiar with that. And what I mean with platform is, are you going to be transactional with your customers? So basically keep on selling them, your goods and the way you have and be a trader? Or are you going to basically offer them a wide variety of services and change that dynamic? And what we're seeing is that retailers more and more embody the concept of a platform. So basically, they're really thinking about themselves more as, thinking of my purpose is X. It could be health and wellness. It could be gaming. It could be, there is multiple. Let's take health and wellness as an example. And you create a series of services, an ecosystem, by bringing, dietitians and clinicians, etc., creating events, commerce, and link all of those up, right? So I think retailers are doing quite a bit of that work. And then in the back end of it, do data monetization and really thinking about, how you actually transform that business. So that is happening in the background. Now, what's the role of supply chain there? I think as you think of your supply chain, it's a key enabler for your growth. And there, basically, the view is, okay, given all of that, what are all the different supply chains that I need? And for each one of those, what are the series of decisions on how do I gonna do my fulfillment? And I may have 10 different options from fulfillment, from dark stores to micro fulfillment to big automated warehouses to manual to, there's a series of decisions of those. And it is about creating the right level of analytics to balance service levels with the right cost to serve and, the right sustainability to make sure that, I'm serving my customer in the most ideal way. I think that's a little bit the dynamic that they're faced with.
And then kind of marrying the two, if we could put this under the heading of collaboration, what are best practices that you would advise or observe on how manufacturers and retailers can best collaborate around supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one example I like to talk about is to take the food industry. Okay, you have millions and millions of farmers, and you have 7 billion, 8 billion consumers keeping on changing, and you have only a few companies in between, 60 companies controlling 80% share, and there's no way those companies survive if I'm still thinking of myself just in my industry without really creating value chain partnerships. And that value chain partnership goes way broader than retail, consumer, manufacturer. It goes all the way back to the farmer, right? And really creating, coalitions and consortiums. And we're seeing quite a bit of that happening. And just think about wheat as an example that you mentioned earlier. What's that alternative look like, and what does that take to actually incentivize the entire value chain to actually move to that, right? And I think it takes a lot of effort to create a coalition to change that, and quite a bit of partnership. So I see more and more of that happening. Of course, I think there is the typical retail consumer packaged good company, collaborative planning and forecasting. That's been going on for years, and I think it will continue. But what we're talking about now is a step change, and multi-party partnerships, really much stronger alignment, and then sharing of digitization to actually being able to track goods all the way to the source, which is a big topic.
So it'll be interesting. I mean, topically, what I think's been in the paper here with retailers reporting their results the past couple of weeks is there's a bunch of inventory coming in that retailers don't want. They kind of ordered for the pandemic, like a different version of the pandemic, and where consumers' minds were and their wallets were. And now people want less patio furniture or a computer, and now they want to go travel. They want to go eat out in a restaurant. What do you think some of the impacts on both the manufacturers and the retailers are going to be with working through some inventory?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, because basically, as you say, the world is changing. It's changing so fast. And a lot of that inventory that was planned is always, the typical way is you look at what last year was and you say, okay, it's going to be very similar. What we're seeing is a lot of patterns are changing. Weather and changes in that just changes completely one season versus the other. What you could use for outdoor furniture may not be needed, right? So there's a ton of dynamics that are taking place. And some of the best-in-class companies I've seen are basically looking at sensing capabilities and planning. So being able to, instead of a plan based on historical, which you basically look forward and think about creating different sensing capabilities and different algorithms to be able to see what's going to be needed in the future based on a series of parameters. So it changes the dynamic on what did I sell last year to what should I sell to, what are the things I have to believe to carry that type of inventory. Yeah, and that changes completely how you plan. And I see quite a bit of that movement, which is sensing what's ahead and really changing what you're saying.
Well, you had spoken about data and analytics, and this is like demand signal forecasting and things like that. And and you talked about speed and agility.
Yeah.
And just having better tools and better metrics to really be able to, back to future back, to be able to kind of anticipate what's coming down the road, rather than how do we just recast what we did last year, because we're seeing that playbook probably doesn't do very well.
That's right.
Environment. So being respectful of time, Bahige, if you could put all this in just a little bit of that what, so what, now what package, what would a summary kind of look like, is it from a Bain perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the what, more than ever, supply chain is critical to to create a competitive advantage to companies, right? It's just not about survival. It is about being able to thrive. We see it based on all the crises that we have. We see it based on the tense geopolitical environment. We see it based on the changes in consumers taking place. Your supply chain is your critical capabilities. So what? I think there is a call to action. To basically to shift the dynamic of your supply chain from an enabling function to a core business function that sits at the table and collaborates with your set of stakeholders and is fully anchored in business decision. It takes part in shaping a strategy of going to a new channel, a new market, or basically growing your core capabilities. And you're now what is basically you need to create a balancing act between the levers to survive this environment we live in, which is unusual. From deploying the right playbooks to fight inflation, making sure you're resilient, you're making sure you have traceability in your business, to transforming the business and thinking of digitization, thinking of future of supply chain and what it takes from your capabilities to lead in the future, knowing that there is this uncertainty, right? So embracing that uncertainty and saying this is going to be part of my business, embracing that uncertainty, how my business would look forward. I think those are the three layers.
No, really appreciate that. This is going to be a little bit of a random question here at the end, and so we'll take it as such. To me, it feels like all of this is predicated on that the company has a strategy and that they've got a good strategy, a workable strategy. And so because of prioritization and things like that, we know what needs to be prioritized. Just whether this is quantitative, qualitative, whatever, how well do you feel overall clients actually have a good workable strategy, or they really need to do Control-Alt-Delete and a little bit of a start over?
Yeah, someone told me a say that stuck with me because it was very intuitive, like what Mike Tyson says. Everyone has a strategy until they're punched in the face.
Yes.
I don't know if it's the best analogy, but I feel it's a reflection of what we're going through. Everyone had a strategy and plans and what they wanted to do, etc. And they've been basically coming after with a series of shocks, one after the other. Yeah. From COVID to the macroeconomic with Ukraine to what's happening in the world with labor and containers and all of that, right? So it's one after the others. And I feel that very few strategies embed uncertainty. So it's in many cases I feel the strategies are still done in a very old-fashioned manner, and let's basically plan things, etc., by channel, product, whatever. And actually, what we live in is a series of uncertainty, which basically says, what do I have to believe to actually get to this point? And what happens if those things are off? What would that mean, right? I think that is completely a different mindset of thinking of the future. And that's what I see leaders spend their time on, which is, moving from a very clear view of the future to what do I have to believe type of view, and really translating that into what does it take to win.
I cannot think of a better way to end this conversation. I think that's great. Bahige, thank you so much. I mean, I'm honored that you would devote a few minutes. The fact that you're sharing your expertise with our audience, I know that they appreciate. It's a very, very important topic. It's not niche, it's core to strategy and winning today and in the future. And so I just want to say thank you. And I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Bob, it's been a real pleasure and honor as well. And I'm a big fan of your podcast. I think you've had really great lineups in the past weeks, and I look forward to continue listening to it on the weekends.
Oh, well, we had our cleanup hitter today, so we continue with a great lineup. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and we wish you well, and blessings.